Hello, my name is Camry Lowy, and this is for Unit 3, Assignment 2, the differentiated instructions based on an self-contained ASL class, a pull-out PSE group of students, and then as well as an oral class for deaf or hard of hearing students using amplification. So, the first part that I'm going to be discussing is my modifications for a self-contained ASL class. My lesson that I have chosen to review is one that I created based on a literature story for a second grade class, and that book is called If I Were a Verb, and what that discusses is a story regarding an explanation of verbs through visual imagery as well as examples through a creative outlet. So for my learning objectives, I've chosen to have the students follow along with if you were a verb, develop an understanding of the vocabulary as well as what a verb contains, and create their own storybook. And that is based on the original lesson plan that I had created. Now the modification that I made for the ASL lesson plan is to actually, instead of having them create a visual book or an actual book, I'd rather have them do act out that book or through sign or storytelling in front of the class. So the way that I would measure the students' mastery based on my requests is going to be in order to create a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, as well as correctly using verbs in the form of sign. Pardon me, my allergies are pretty bad right now, so if I have to stop and sneeze, you know why. A few of the pre-assessments that I'd be using in order for this assignment is to provide additional images through either acting them out, pictures, videos, PowerPoints, and that's just to help better identify a verb. I feel that if you're able to act things out, especially for students that are in ASL users only, then their understanding level just increases that much more because they are so visually adaptive individuals. So I also need to read the story and convert that into ASL as well. Connect verbs that are used prior to their background knowledge and bridge that gap, as well as having them describe and detail different activities that they've done where the use of verbs where they're using verbs that they don't even realize that they're using, and pointing those verbs out. So if a student tells me during the, at recess, I love to run around the playground, well, run is considered a verb, it's considered an action word. So making sure that they're aware of those things that they're doing in their daily life and using that connection. And then also just provide an example of what I'm expecting at the very end of the assignment as well. So providing a signed ASL example. Some differentiation or accommodations that I'll use is to make sure that I'm modifying verb vocabulary that's appropriate for that level of students. Even though, being in second grade, they might be able to use in a mainstream class more difficult verbs. I still want to make sure that the verbs and the vocabulary that I'm using is fit to the ability of my students. As well as using verbs that have definable meanings rather than are just function verbs. So a few of the resources that I'm going to need are crayons, paper, pencil, pre-stapled, and beginning and middle and graphic organizer. But with this, I'm actually not going to be using crayons or a pre-stapled If I Were a Verb book. Instead, I am going to still be using a beginning, middle, and end graphic organizer, as well as crayons, as well as paper and pencil for them to kind of sort of jot their ideas on. My instructions go along the lines of this. I would really like to start to just act out verbs. So if I'm explaining the verb of running, instead of actually signing run, then I would like to actually physically run and see if the students will be able to guess the verb. Same thing for swimming, and allow them to guess it, hopefully using some of that background knowledge that they have to apply it to the lesson. And then I explain what exactly a verb is, providing even additional examples through visuals such as computers, videos, picture aids, PowerPoints, and dramatic play or acting. And then within those small groups, those students themselves are going to brainstorm lists of words that are verbs. And that's going to be in small group collaboration. They can kind of feed off of each other. Once those students have finished collaborating, we'll go ahead and have them name the verbs, and then as well as connect the signs and place those verbs on the board as well. So have a visual image of the verb on the board through written, have the sign provided to them, as well as me act out the verb as well. Once that is completed, and we have a list of verbs on the board, I am going to want to have them create a graphic organizer of a story that they're going to have to think of in order to present to the class, and it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I do have an example of that, of what it looks like. So this is what the graphic organizer looks like right here. As you can see, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end section. And this is where they can jot down ideas, character events, storyline, that such thing. Once the students have completed that, then I would ask them to bring it over to me so I can pretty much evaluate it, just to make sure that I'm just checking for understanding more than anything. Are they making any mistakes? Do they understand the reference of verbs? Do they have a beginning, middle, and end to the story as well? Once that is all completed, students will then be able to start practicing their stories that they will present in front of the class. Once they have a story developed, what I wanted them to do is actually get into pairs and team up together to work with each other and to look at each other's stories to try and identify any mistakes that they may have caught, make sure that they're using those verbs correctly, and make sure that students that they're paired with can actually clearly identify a beginning, middle, and end to that story. Once everything is completed, students have finished that up, students will then be able to act this out in front of the class. So I know that a few students have stage fright, so if that is the case, then they'll be able to act that out just in front of the teacher in general, or myself. So so as far as learning activities, guided practice, it can be small group collaboration, classroom with the overview of what the verbs the students came up with, and peer review for visual story development and recommendations. And then also potential for guided practice, meaning not all, but maybe some students will need help, is that visual storytelling, helping develop a story in general that they might need some assistance. Independent practice is going to be the graphic organizer, as well as the presentation of a visual story. Checking for understanding is always going to be important. Mostly I will be checking for the finished product as well as throughout the lesson as well. That's why I'm checking the graphic organizer, walking around during lesson, and making sure that they're actually getting the signs, getting the verbs correct as well. My assessment is going to be based off their overall completion of their story, their sign story. Closure, I think, is important, and that's going to be is in the form of all the students being able to present and then being able to ask each other questions afterwards, as well as me post questions or the students post questions towards me. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate it.